talk a little more about tariffs. I mean, you recognize that some of the effects of the tariffs will be one-off, transitory, but you also have said that perhaps they will give room for a number of firms to raise prices. You mentioned dryers. When washing machine prices went up because of tariffs, dryer prices also went up in tandem, even though they weren't tariffed. What's your sense about the effects of tariffs on inflation? What would make them more persistent? And what would make them have effects on growth?
So in a kind of a simple starting point is one tariff comes in that gets passed along in prices and raises inflation, but it's just a one-time thing. So the price level goes up and that's it. But that can happen in some circumstances, but it depends on a number of things which we don't know yet. And I would point to a couple of them, or three of them actually. One is just the size of the effects. And as I mentioned, the tariffs are larger than forecasters had expected, certainly larger than we expected, even in our upside case. We looked at a range of cases. So that's one. The second one is how long does it take for the tariffs to have their effects on inflation? To the extent it takes longer and longer, that raises the risks that the public will begin to experience higher inflation. They'll come to expect it, and companies will come to expect it. So that risks higher inflation. And the third is just what I mentioned in my speech, which is my remarks, which is got to keep inflation expectations well anchored. So if we have those three things under control, that's what it will take. And indeed, our role is to make sure that this will be a one-time increase in prices and not something that turns into an ongoing inflation process. That's a big part of our job.
What about the effects of tariffs on quantities? With the level of tariffs that, for example, have been currently applied on China, there's a fear that the supply chain may get disrupted, that firms may not be able to import their relevant stuff from China given the level of prices. If it turns into a supply shock, would the Fed's response be different than if it was primarily something which affected just prices?
So I actually had dinner at the Chicago Fed last night and with a number of directors of various parts of the Chicago Fed, and many of them are CEOs of significant companies, and they this uncertainty that they're feeling and the issue with imported components to their products is just a huge issue. But with if you look back at the pandemic, if you remember, there was a shortage of semiconductors, and that led to a shortage of cars at a time of extremely high car demand. And it was a prolonged shortage because production couldn't keep up. And that led to an extended period, one of the things that led to an extended period of inflation. So when you think about supply disruptions, that is the kind of thing that can take time to resolve, and it can lead what would have been a one-time inflation shock to be extended, perhaps more persistent, and we would worry about that. In this case, you can look at the car companies, which their supply chains are likely seem to be on track to be disrupted significantly, and you would worry that that process will take some years and that the inflationary process might be extended. So these are all of this is highly uncertain. We're thinking now really before the tariffs have their effects, as how they might affect the economy, and that's why we're waiting really to see what the policies ultimately are, and then we can make a better assessment of what the economic effects will be.